The rain came down in cold sheets, soaking the cracked roads and forgotten houses of Hollows End, a town that once hosted the largest Halloween celebration in the entire state of Illinois, now reduced to nothing more than a ghost's playground. On October 31, 1995, 13 children vanished during the parade. Their bodies were never found, only masks, stained with blood and scattered across Hollow Square. The town never celebrated Halloween again. But now, 20 years later to the day, someone was trying to bring it back. The flyer was black and orange, etched with curling letters that dripped like blood. One night only, the Halloween festival returns to Hollows End. Face your fears. Come in costume. Come with courage. Come if you dare. Nobody knew who printed the flyers. They simply appeared, nailed to telephone poles, stuffed in mailboxes, stapled to the church doors. And against all logic, against all warnings, people came. Among them was Detective Mara Vex, a woman in her late 30s with a crooked nose, cold eyes, and scars on her wrists that never healed. She hadn't been to Hollows End in over 15 years, not since her twin brother, Marcus, disappeared during that cursed Halloween. Now she was back. Rain slid down the windshield of her rental car as she pulled into the cracked parking lot outside Hollows End Elementary, now boarded up and rotting, its windows black like eyeless sockets. She lit a cigarette with shaking fingers, watching as costumed children and clueless parents filtered through the square. Balloons bobbed. Laughter rang. It all felt wrong. A man dressed as a pumpkin-headed scarecrow handed her a candy apple. His painted-on smile never moved, his real mouth stitched shut with wire. "You'll want to stay sweet," he rasped through bloodied threads. "They like sweet things." Mara tossed the apple onto the sidewalk. A scream echoed from somewhere inside the school building. The laughter stopped. The crowd turned, but nothing was there. "Prank," someone said, forcing out a nervous chuckle. "Just part of the show." But Mara knew better. She walked toward the school alone. Inside, the air was stale and damp. The faint scent of bleach battled with something older, something fouler, like rot and iron. The flickering hallway lights cast long shadows that moved just slightly wrong, twitching when she didn't. She passed rows of open lockers, each one lined with pictures of children in Halloween costumes, a clown, a vampire, a witch, a mummy, 13 in all. Her brother's picture was last. He was dressed as a skeleton, holding a plastic scythe. She hadn't seen that photo in years. A cold breath brushed her neck. She turned fast. No one was there. Her radio crackled. "Vex. This is Captain Holden. You at the festival yet?" She raised the walkie to her lips. "Affirmative. Just entered the school." "Something's wrong, Cap, real wrong. I think someone's staging something sick." Holden's voice came back, garbled and buzzing. "Be careful. There've been reports." Static. Then silence. The lights went out. She pulled her flashlight from her belt, the beam slicing through the dark like a knife. It caught something at the end of the hallway. Movement. She crept forward slowly. Her boots echoed across the linoleum. The thing in the hallway didn't move like a person. It shuffled, limped. It made a wet dragging sound. She raised her gun and called out. "Stop. Police." It didn't stop. She fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The thing froze. And then it spoke. Trick or treat. Its voice was wrong. Too many voices in one. A choir of the dead. It stepped into the light. It was wearing 13 masks, stitched together into a horrific patchwork that barely clung to a deformed skull. Beneath it, blood leaked from the seams like sweat. One child's mask. Then another. And another. Mara staggered back, bile rising in her throat. "Marcus," she whispered, before she could stop herself. The creature tilted its head. "I remember you," it said. And charged. She barely got off a second shot. The bullet struck the thing in the shoulder, but it didn't bleed. Instead, black tar spilled out, steaming as it hit the floor. She ran. Through the hallway, down the stairs, deeper into the belly of the school where the janitor's basement had once been. She slammed the metal door behind her and braced it with a mop handle. Darkness. Only the flicker of her dying flashlight. The walls were covered in red chalk symbols, pagan spirals, bones, and scrawled numbers, 13. 13, 13. In the center of the floor, 13 jack-o'-lanterns burned with cold blue flames. Inside each was something human, a finger, a tongue, a glassy eye. And in the far corner sat a man in a blood-stained suit. He smiled. "Detective Vex," he said calmly. "You're right on time." She raised her gun. "Hands where I can see them." He didn't move. "I warned them this would happen," he said. "But they never listen to the ones who know." "Who are you?" "I'm the one who buried the hollow blood. I'm the last one left who remembers." She cocked the hammer. "Explain. Now." He looked up. The children weren't taken. They were given. Blood for protection. A pact made in desperation when the town was dying. It worked, until someone broke the seal. What seal? He pointed to a jack-o'-lantern shaped like a screaming child. This one. Inside it, something was moving. Crawling. Trying to get out. The door above creaked. The creature was coming. Mara stepped back, her heart a drumbeat in her ears. The man stood, raising his hands. "You can shoot me, but it won't save you. It's already begun." "What has?" He smiled wider. "The hollow blood flows again. Every drop spilled tonight feeds the ones beneath." She pulled the trigger. He fell. But behind her, the jack-o'-lantern burst open. And something black slithered free. She ran again, this time into the old crawlspace behind the boiler room, where the school's original blueprints were still nailed to the wall. Her light flickered across the paper. There, beneath the gymnasium, was something labeled only as the Hollow Chapel. It had never been on any public record. A hidden chamber. She traced the outline with shaking fingers. Suddenly, she heard it again. Children's laughter. But twisted. Mocking. It echoed from behind the boiler, where the bricks were bleeding. She smashed at the wall with her flashlight. One brick gave way. Then another. Behind them, stairs. Stone, and ancient. Descending into blackness. She didn't want to go down. But she had no choice. The descent felt like hours. The stairs were slick with moss and old blood. On the walls, more symbols, scratched by nails, some fresh. She reached the bottom. A giant iron door blocked the way. Burned into it was a single phrase. "They come when the blood runs hollow." She touched it. It groaned open. Inside, 13 stone chairs circled a pit. 12 were filled, with rotting corpses in costumes. And the 13th was empty. Waiting. Mara stepped into the room. The door slammed shut behind her. And above, in Hollow Square, the town's festival was beginning to unravel. Children in costumes wandered away from their parents, drawn by whispers. Parents began to scream, but found their voices stolen. Fog rolled in thick and crimson, drowning the laughter. And on the main stage, a new puppet show began. Only these puppets were real. And they bled. The moment the iron door slammed behind Mara Vex, the chamber's darkness thickened like clotting blood. She turned, gritting her teeth as she tried to force the door open, but it had sealed with an ancient groan, the stone locking into place like a tomb. She was trapped. Her flashlight flickered, dimmed, then died entirely. But the blue glow from the jack-o'-lanterns above hadn't left her eyes, it still lived behind her vision, a memory that refused to fade. 13 chairs. 12 corpses. 1 empty seat. The pit in the center oozed a slow, pulsing black substance, thick, sticky, and alive. It moved in sync with something beneath, as if something massive was breathing underneath the town. The air reeked of sulfur, rot, and burning meat. Suddenly, a whisper. Not a voice. Many. Children. Sit down, Mara. You belong with us. Finish what they started. She stumbled backward, but the darkness moved with her, breathing in sync with her fear. Her boots splashed through a shallow layer of viscous fluid, like blood that had never dried. She aimed her weapon into the dark. Show yourselves, she shouted. The light returned in the form of 13 suspended lanterns, glowing orange flames flaring to life on their own. They hung from nothing, casting long shadows across the chamber. And in each chair, the corpses stirred. They weren't entirely dead. Their mouths moved, stitched shut, yet whispering in muffled unison. Faces bloated and half-eaten by insects. Eyeless sockets stared blankly as black tears oozed down their cheeks. Then, a groan from the empty chair. Stone cracked. The seat shifted forward. The pit bubbled, and something rose. It was him. The thing from the hallway. The one wearing their faces. The one with Marcus's voice. It stepped from the pit without effort, dripping black bile, its stitched face twitching as it smiled through 13 mouths. You opened the hollow, sister, it gurgled. Mara's heart slammed against her ribs. Her hands trembled, but her grip on the pistol held. You're not my brother. The creature tilted its head, mockingly. Maybe not anymore. But he opened the door. He called to them that night, prayed for escape. They answered. They, she asked, backing toward the wall. The hollow ones, it hissed. Buried beneath this town long before the settlers arrived. Blood eaters. Dream drinkers. The pact was made to protect this place in exchange for 13 lives every 13 years. The mayor agreed. The parents agreed. They even dressed us up to make it a game. A parade of slaughter. Mara's stomach churned. You're lying. Am I? It rasped, stepping closer. Why do you think the bodies were never found? Why do you think the town never recovered? They fed us to it, and we became its voice. She fired. Once. Twice. The creature's chest exploded, but it didn't fall. It smiled, coughing out a cloud of black flies that buzzed in a screeching spiral around her head. One crawled across her cheek. She slapped it off and stumbled backward, just as the empty chair began glowing red-hot. Chains rose from the pit. Rusty. Dripping. And fastened themselves to her wrists and ankles. No. The force yanked her downward, slamming her body into the stone. Her limbs were spread wide, pulled taut by the animated shackles. She screamed, fighting to reach her belt, but her gear was sliding away, pulled by unseen hands into the pit. The corpses began chanting. Their mouths opened wide, impossibly wide, stitches splitting, jaws dislocating. Hollow blood. Hollow blood. Hollow blood. The creature raised its arms. The 13th chair began to lower into the pit, with her in it. Mara shrieked as the black ooze crawled up her boots, rising up her calves like fingers made of tar. Suddenly, gunfire. Loud. Real. Close. The side wall exploded in a shower of rock and dust. Flashlights poured into the chamber. Voices. Get her out of there. It was Captain Holden, her old partner. And 3 SWAT officers, armed and already firing at the creature. The bullet struck it head-on. It didn't flinch. But it screamed, and vanished into the pit like smoke in reverse. The chains dropped. Mara collapsed onto the floor, coughing and gagging. Holden ran to her, pulling her up by the arms. Jesus, Vex. What the hell is this place? She didn't answer. Couldn't. All she could do was look at the 13th chair, now empty again. And the pit, which had stopped bubbling, but hadn't stopped breathing. 2 hours later, Hollows End Police Station. Mara sat in a rusted metal chair inside an interrogation room, wrapped in a silver blanket, shivering as Holden placed a steaming coffee cup in front of her. "You've got blood on your face," he said gently. "It's not mine," she muttered. "No. It's not." He sat across from her, jaw clenched. "Do you want to tell me what the hell is going on down there?" Mara stared into the coffee. Her hands were still trembling. "They sacrificed them," she whispered. "All 13. In 95. It was a deal made to protect the town from something buried deep underground. Something ancient. And now it's waking up." Holden swallowed. "We found something down there. A chamber. Corpses. A pit that leads deeper than we can map. The forensics team can't even get samples from the sludge. It dissolves their equipment." "It's alive," she said flatly. Holden leaned forward. "You said your brother was one of them?" She hesitated, then nodded. "I saw him, or something wearing his face. It's angry. Betrayed. And now it wants blood. More blood." Holden sighed, rubbed his temples. "The town council is trying to call it a hoax. Kids playing games. Costumes. Ritual graffiti. You know how they are." Mara stood. "They'll see the truth soon. The blood has started flowing again. The creature said it returns every 13 years, but it's been 20. Holden's eyes narrowed. "You think the seal was broken early?" "No," she said. "I think something helped it break out. Someone." Back in Hollow Square, midnight. The festival had dissolved into chaos. Children were missing. 10 so far. All unaccounted for. Their names eerily mirrored the original 13. No one could explain it. Parents wept. Officers spread out. Helicopters circled overhead. But Mara knew better. The hollow blood needed 13. And it was only getting started. Elsewhere, an old farmhouse outside town. A tall, gaunt man stood alone in the attic, surrounded by black candles and dried bones. He wore a suit that hadn't been cleaned in decades, his pale hands trembling as he traced runes onto the floor in human ash. He lit the 13th candle. Behind him, 13 child-sized mannequins stood in a circle. Their mouths were stitched. Their costumes freshly pressed. He whispered to them. "My children of the hollow, it's time to rise." And then he cut his own throat. The blood sprayed across the runes. The mannequins turned their heads toward him. And began to smile. The air in Hollow's End was thick with dread. The fog hadn't lifted since midnight. It poured from the storm drains and coiled around buildings like serpents, hissing against the streetlights. The town's silence was deafening, no laughter, no footsteps, no sirens anymore. Only the low, rhythmic drumming of something beneath the earth. 13 heartbeats. Each louder than the last. And they were getting closer. At the police station, 3:03 a.m. Detective Mara Vex stared at the evidence board, now filled with Polaroids, red yarn, old newspaper clippings, and fresh pictures of the 10 missing children. The room stank of stale coffee, sweat, and fear. Captain Holden stood beside her, arms folded, jaw clenched tight enough to crack. This town is dying again, he said flatly. It's happening just like 95. No, Mara whispered. Worse. This time it's faster. It's feeding. She pointed to a circled name on the board, Grayson Bell, the old mayor of Hollow's End. The man who had disappeared after the original 13 children went missing. His obituary was dated 1996, cause of death listed as accidental gas leak, but the photo on file was identical to the man she had seen in the Hollow Chapel, the one who warned her before she shot him. Holden looked at her. Are you saying he's alive? No. I think he's undead. Or possessed. Or both. Holden scoffed, trying to contain the terror crawling up his spine. What about the pit? They're calling it a sinkhole, she muttered. They're wrong. She pulled out a sketch from her file, one drawn hastily in her hotel room, the map of the underground chapel and its 13 thrones surrounding the bottomless pit. In the center, she'd labeled it, the mouth. It's not a sinkhole. It's a throat. It leads down to the hollow ones. The ones who were fed blood and pain for decades. And now they're hungry again. Holden's radio crackled to life. This is Unit 4, we've got another missing child. 11 total now. Name's Lexi Hartford. Vanished from her bedroom. Window wide open. No prints. Nothing. Mara's breath caught in her throat. 11. Only 2 more. We're running out of time, she whispered. Once it hits 13. Holden stared at her. What happens then? Mara looked him in the eye. They come back. 4:06 a.m., outside town. The old Bell farmhouse sat in the middle of acres of rotting cornfields. Crows circled overhead, silent and watching. Inside, the attic floor was soaked in dried blood. The mannequins were gone. The air buzzed with thousands of flies. A shadow moved past the upper windows, something dragging something else. A child's shoe rolled down the staircase. It was fresh. Warm. Outside, 2 teenagers, Jenna and Kyle, dared each other to go inside. It was Hollow's End, after all. Urban legends were their favorite drug. $10 says you don't even last 5 minutes, Jenna teased, her phone recording. Kyle smirked and kicked open the rotting door. Watch and learn. The darkness swallowed him whole. Seconds passed. Then a scream. Then silence. Jenna laughed nervously. Kyle. No answer. Then she heard the dragging. Not from inside. From behind her. She turned. And the last thing she saw was a child-sized figure in a tattered clown costume, holding Kyle's severed spine like a leash. The live stream caught her screams. And something watching from the cornfields. 5:12 a.m., Hollow's End Cemetery. Mara stood alone at her brother Marcus's grave. Or rather, the empty grave. They never found his body, only his mask, shattered and bloody. Her breath steamed in the freezing dawn air, and her fingers trembled as she placed her palm against the headstone. I never stopped looking, she whispered. The wind stirred. And something moved behind her. She spun around, gun drawn, but it was just fog. Or so she thought. Then she heard the crunch of leaves. A footstep. Another. And then she saw him. Marcus. Or what was left of him. He stood at the edge of the cemetery, dressed in his same skeleton costume from 20 years ago. His eyes were black voids. His skin gray, stitched. His mouth hung open in a silent scream. Marcus, she choked. He stepped forward, jerking like a marionette. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know. I didn't know what they did to you. He didn't speak. He just pointed. To the woods behind the cemetery. To a shape waiting in the fog. It wasn't human. It was tall. 12 feet at least. Dressed in robes made of stitched children's costumes, wearing a crown of rusted scissors. Its face was hidden behind 13 sewn-together Halloween masks. And it smiled without lips. The Reaper of Hollow Blood. Mara's legs refused to move. Then Marcus turned to her, placed something in her hand, a mask. His mask. And with the last shred of humanity in him, he whispered. Finish what they started, or everyone dies. Then the creature stepped forward. And Marcus charged at it, screaming. He bought her 5 seconds. Just enough to run. Back at the police station, 6 a.m. The board now read, 12 children missing. Holden cursed and threw a chair at the wall. Mara burst into the room, breathless and pale. Marcus, he's alive. Or something like it. He showed me the Reaper. It's here. Walking the town. Holden didn't question her anymore. He believed. We need to find the last kid before they do. Mara's phone buzzed. An unknown number. No caller ID. She answered. A child's voice. Weak. Help me. I'm in the pumpkin house. The call cut off. She stared at Holden. There's only one place that matches that name. They said it had burned down. They were wrong. 6:29 a.m., the pumpkin house. It loomed at the far edge of town, once the centerpiece of Hollow's End Halloween tours. Now, a blackened ruin covered in vines and ashes. But someone had rebuilt it, partially. The jack-o'-lanterns glowed along the path. Their carved faces were all screaming. Inside, they found a single child. Little Clara Morrow. Barely breathing, tied to a pentagram of severed arms. She looked up at Mara with tear-filled eyes. Are you the angel? She whispered. Mara untied her, held her tight. No. But I'll get you out of this. Holden stared at the floorboards. There was blood flowing upward from the cracks. It's starting, he said, backing up. The 13th drop. The seal. The house shook. Outside, every jack-o'-lantern exploded. Smoke billowed from the basement. And a laugh echoed through the house. High-pitched. Giggling. And then, deep. Low. 13 voices at once. Trick, or treat. 7 a.m., Halloween morning. The sky over Hollow's End turned black. Not from clouds. From wings. Bats the size of wolves. The streets filled with fog that smelled like corpses. Parents woke to find their children standing at their bedsides, unmoving, faces blank, whispering in dead languages. The 13 had risen. And the hollow blood now flowed freely through the veins of the town. And somewhere underground, in a pit beneath the old school, a voice called to Mara. One more soul, sister. One more chair. Come take your seat. And far below, the 13th throne began to glow. Waiting for her. October 31st, 8:06 a.m. Location, Hollow's End, now quarantined. The National Guard had erected barricades around the perimeter of Hollow's End, but it was too late. The rot had already taken root. The sky above the town was a permanent, swirling black, blotting out the sun. Screams echoed through the fog-choked streets like echoes in a cathedral made for the damned. And in the center of it all, the school. Hollow's End Elementary. The old, crumbling building that had birthed the pit. The mouth. It now pulsed like a beating heart. The vines of blackened flesh that once hid underground had burst through the asphalt, growing like veins up lampposts, stop signs, and homes. Wherever they touched, the world seemed to decay, aging 100 years in seconds. Cars rusted to dust. Walls collapsed. Trees twisted into skeletal shapes. Inside, the 13th throne burned with a deep red glow, casting shadows on the walls of the hollow chapel. And the final child, Clara Morrow, was missing again. Mara Veck stood in her motel bathroom, gripping the sides of the sink, sweat pouring down her face. Her skin was pale, her eyes bloodshot, and the mask her brother had given her sat on the counter like an accusation. She stared at herself in the cracked mirror. "You've got maybe 12 hours before this whole town gets swallowed," she whispered. Behind her, the walls began to bleed. No surprise anymore. She picked up the skeleton mask, turned it over in her hands. It was still damp with cold sweat and something else. Something alive. Inside it, carved into the cloth lining, were words written in a strange, almost childlike scrawl. "We're me to remember. We're me to open. We're me to die." She put it on. The world changed instantly. She was no longer in the motel. She was standing in the past, Halloween night, 1995. She saw the parade, the dancing, the children skipping through the streets dressed as goblins and ghouls. Her heart ached as she saw Marcus, 10 years old, laughing, waving at her across the crowd. But no one was happy. The smiles were forced. The parents wore guilt like a second skin. And then came the chimes. 13 bells, echoing from somewhere below. The children froze. One by one, their faces turned blank, their eyes turned black, and their feet led them down Hollow Street, toward the school. Toward the mouth. Mara tried to run toward Marcus. But she couldn't move. The vision forced her to watch. The school's front doors opened. And something waited there. A shape. The Reaper of Hollow Blood, its stitched face smiling, arms spread, welcoming the young offerings. And then Mara was pulled back to the present. The mask ripped itself from her face and hit the floor, gasping like a dying lung. 9 a.m. Hollow Square. The town was now devoid of people. No children. No parents. Only the marked remained. Mara and Captain Holden met at the war memorial in the square. The statue had been defaced. Recarved into an effigy of a tall, twisted god with 13 arms. At its base were skinned mannequins, bleeding real blood, twitching. "Clara's gone," Holden said. "Vanished from the station." Mara nodded. "She's being taken to the pit. She's the 13th. We stop it there?" Holden asked. Mara shook her head. "We end it there." They drove without sirens. The streets writhed beneath them. The school doors stood open, waiting. 9:33 a.m., the Hollow Chapel. The walk through the school was worse than before. The halls had changed, grown longer, impossible in length, as though the building had become a living thing. The lockers opened and closed by themselves. Paintings bled. Desks wept. But Mara and Holden kept going, flashlights slicing through the dark like scalpels. When they reached the chapel, the 13 thrones were now occupied. All 13. Even the one in the center. Clara Morrow sat there, wide-eyed, blood trailing down her chin from her mouth. In her lap, she clutched a jack-o'-lantern carved into a screaming face. Her eyes glowed black. Standing behind her was the Reaper. Mara raised her pistol. "Let her go." The Reaper didn't speak, it laughed. A sound that fractured the air, the bones, the mind. From the other 12 thrones, the corpses began to rise. No longer stitched puppets, but living shadows made flesh. Their faces twitched between who they were and what they'd become. Marcus sat in the 5th throne. He looked at Mara with hollow sorrow in his eyes. "Mara," he whispered. "You were supposed to save me." "I tried," she whispered. The Reaper stepped forward. Its 13 hands opened. And from each, poured the hollow blood. It coated the chapel floor, rising toward the thrones, filling the pit. Mara Vex, it said, in a voice of thunder and childlike laughter. You broke the seal when you returned. You gave us the key. You wore the mask. You opened the memory. And now. It extended its arm. Take your seat. The 13th throne burned again. Mara backed away. I came to end this. Not to join it. Then you must replace what was given, the Reaper said, turning toward Clara. Holden stepped forward. Take me instead. Mara turned to him, shocked. Don't, she whispered. But he nodded. You were always meant to end this. I was just meant to follow. He walked to the Reaper. And sat in the burning chair. Immediately, the ground screamed. The pit shook. The ceiling cracked. The corpses wailed in fury. The Reaper shrieked. You dare defy the Blood Order? Holden looked at Mara one last time. And smiled. Do it. Mara pulled a vial from her pocket. It was filled with hollow blood, siphoned from the chamber wall earlier that night. She threw it into the pit. The floor exploded. The blood ignited in black flame. The throne shattered. The Reaper lunged, but Marcus stepped in its path. For a moment, just one, Mara saw her brother again. Not the monster. Not the corpse. Just a boy. He looked at her and said, Run. Then the Reaper consumed him, devouring Marcus in a spiral of shadow and flame. Mara grabbed Clara and ran. As the chapel collapsed, the screams of the Hollow Ones filled the world. The pit collapsed. The mouth closed. 10:10 a.m. outside the school. The ground caved in as the school was pulled into itself, consumed by the collapsing pit. Vines withdrew. The black fog lifted. The sky slowly brightened. Hollow's End began to breathe again. Mara stood with Clara in her arms, watching it all. Marcus was gone. So was Holden. But the town was saved. For now. Later that night, news report excerpt. A sinkhole collapsed the abandoned Hollow's End Elementary today, and the town is now being declared a federal disaster zone. No official casualties reported, though 13 children had gone missing in the past 24 hours. Mysteriously, all have returned home, alive, though shaken. No memory of the events. One woman, Detective Mara Vex, is being hailed as a hero, though she refuses to speak to the media. As for what caused the collapse or the town-wide blackout, authorities remain tight-lipped. Elsewhere, deep underground, the Reaper's body lay shattered. But its mask remained. Floating in black ichor. And somewhere, beneath even the hollow, it whispered. The blood remembers. November 1st, 3:33 a.m. Hollow's End, post-collapse. The town slept again. On the surface, the nightmare was over. The hollow chapel had collapsed into itself, burying the Reaper and the pit beneath tons of rubble. Children who had vanished returned home blank-eyed, quiet but unharmed. The sky cleared. The air no longer reeked of sulfur. But peace was a lie. Beneath the surface, the blood still moved. The mouth hadn't died. It had only fed. And now it remembered. Mara Vex sat alone in a church pew, the only place in town that hadn't rotted. A storm lantern flickered beside her as she clutched Marcus's cracked skeleton mask. Her fingertips were raw from tracing the carved letters inside. We're me to remember. She hadn't slept since the collapse. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus consumed by the Reaper, his scream echoing into blackness. Every time she tried to rest, she felt the heartbeat of the hollow pulsing through the town's veins. She knew something was wrong. She wasn't finished. The door creaked open. Clara stood in the threshold, barefoot in her nightgown, eyes wide. I saw them again, she whispered. Mara stood quickly, moving to her. Who? The other children. The ones still down there. The ones who didn't come back like me. They're not whole. Clara looked up at her. They're remembering. 4:14 a.m., Clara's dream journal. Mara flipped through the battered leather book in Clara's lap. Every page had a child's drawing. 13 pages. 13 children. Their eyes were black. Their mouths sewn. In each image, a black shape stood behind them, sometimes in a cloak, sometimes wearing their faces, sometimes as nothing at all. But the last page was different. It showed Mara. Not how she was, but how she would become. A throne of flesh. Her mouth sewn shut. A crown of broken bones. And carved above her head. The Blood Queen. Mara dropped the book. Clara didn't look away. You were chosen, she whispered. They need someone to rule in the Reaper's place. Someone made of memory, and regret, and rage. No, Mara said, stepping back. I destroyed that thing. I watched it die. Clara shook her head slowly. You only killed its shape. Not its soul. And then the girl lifted her arm. Her fingers were no longer fingers. They were bones. 4:33 a.m., Hollow's End Morgue. Mara kicked in the door. She had a suspicion, and now it screamed in her bones. The morgue was freezing cold. The power had been shut off since the collapse, but the air smelled sharp and acidic, like blood kept too long. She moved between body drawers, her flashlight flickering as shadows skittered just out of reach. Drawer 13. She yanked it open. Empty. But something had slept there. The slab was soaked in black blood. Words scratched into the steel red. We rise through her. Suddenly, movement behind her. She turned. A figure stood just beyond the reach of her light. A man in a coroner's coat. Except, he had no face. Just a burlap sack sewn shut, soaked in blood. Dr. Hollow, Mara whispered. She remembered him now, he had overseen the autopsies in '95. Vanished the same night the children did. He stepped forward, scalpel in hand. You're late for your dissection, Queen. 4:38 a.m., morgue hallway. Mara ran. The coroner chased her in impossible silence, scalpel scraping along the wall. Lights exploded above her head as the hallway elongated, another impossibility. The world tilted, cracked, and bled. The Hollow was waking. The rules of reality were bending. She reached the stairwell, only to find children blocking it. All 12. Standing in silence. Their faces masked. Mara froze. Please, she whispered. The children turned in unison. And spoke. We remember your sin. Their voices were hers. Her own voice, multiplied. Then they screamed. The sound shattered glass, burst light bulbs, and cracked the walls around them. Mara collapsed. Blood poured from her nose. Elsewhere, deep beneath Hollow's End. A new throne was being forged. Not from stone. From flesh. The skin of the forgotten dead. The bones of the original 13. The hearts of those who betrayed them. And above it, a mask hovered. Marcus's mask. But no longer cracked. Now whole. Now burning with bloodlight. The Reaper's voice echoed through the hollow. She will rise. She will feed. And the hollow will live forever. 5:01 a.m., Old Bell Farm. Mara dragged herself into the basement of the ruined farmhouse, the same place the mannequins had once stood. Now it was filled with real bodies, stitched together, suspended by meat hooks, twitching in rhythm. A ritual circle burned on the ground. She stepped inside. The voices stopped. And then Marcus spoke. From behind her. You shouldn't have left me. Mara turned, breath caught in her throat. He looked exactly like he had the night he died. 10 years old. Smiling. Whole. But his shadow wasn't a shadow. It was the Reaper, looming just behind him. You wore my mask, Marcus said softly. Now you're part of me. And I'm part of it. I didn't mean to, she whispered. You didn't stop them, he replied. And then he screamed, and his body tore open, revealing nothing but bones and teeth and the Reaper's face inside his chest. The room went black. 5:13 a.m. underground. When Mara awoke, she was already seated in the new throne. Naked. Bleeding. Bound by vines of black hair. The 12 children stood around her. All masks now removed. All faces rotting. The Reaper floated before her, no longer needing a body, now a storm of memory and horror and unfinished sacrifice. It spoke through every mouth in the room. Long live the Queen of Hollow Blood. It placed Marcus's mask onto Mara's face. And the Hollow screamed. 5:55 a.m. across town. Children began to wake. In their beds. In the streets. In the ruins. They all said the same word. In unison, to their parents. Queen. And then their eyes rolled back. They fell. And something else stood up in their place. 6:06 a.m. live news broadcast. And reports are coming in from multiple homes now that the returning children have fallen into comas. Several are speaking in strange, unidentifiable languages. Authorities are recommending evacuation, but the roads have begun to collapse outside of Hollow's End. The broadcast cut. Static. Then the screen went black. And a whisper slipped through the static. The blood is woken. Let the harvest begin. October 31st, 6:06 a.m. Hollow's End, no longer on the map. Roads twisted into endless loops. GPS devices blinked out one by one. Cell signals vanished like breath in a blizzard. No one could find their way out of Hollow's End anymore, not even those born there. It wasn't just a town now. It was a wound. And it was open. Bleeding. 6:15 a.m., the Hollow Chapel, now reborn. The chapel no longer hid beneath the ruins of Hollow's End Elementary. It had grown, bursting through the earth like a tumor. Twisted spires rose into the sky, pulsing with red veins and stitched leather flags. The stone was black and breathing. The air moaned like a lung drowning in blood. Inside, Mara Vex sat on the new throne, her spine fused to the bones beneath it. The vines that bound her were no longer restraints. They were part of her now. Her hair had gone white. Her skin pale and stretched tight over her skull. But her eyes burned with violent crimson light. Each one reflecting 13 masks spinning endlessly in her gaze. She could no longer scream. Her mouth had been sewn shut by the Reaper itself. But her thoughts echoed through the chapel. Let them remember me. Let them suffer what I suffered. Let them feel the hollow inside. Around her, the other 12 thrones were filled by corpses, half-rotted, constantly twitching, muttering ritual verses through stitched mouths. The children stood behind them. Now changed. Inhuman. Their eyes wept hollow blood. And when they smiled, you could see the hunger behind their teeth. 6:33 a.m., across town. Parents cradled lifeless children, crying, shaking, praying. But nothing woke them. Until one child opened her mouth and whispered a word no living tongue should know. Then another. And another. The children began to chant, rising from their beds with twisted joints, bones snapping as they bent in impossible directions. Eyes rolled back. Blood leaked from their ears. And in perfect unison, they said, "All hail the Blood Queen." At once, every mirror in every home shattered. And in each broken shard, Mara's face appeared. Watching. Smiling. Bleeding. 6:44 a.m., the graveyard awakens. The earth split open at Hollow's End Cemetery. Graves tore themselves free, spewing old bones and mists of ash. The dead rose, not as zombies, but as echoes. Shadows wearing faces. Transparent memories with sharp fingers and deeper mouths. The first to climb from the dirt was Grayson Bell, the original mayor who offered the children to the Hollow in '95. His skin was stretched parchment. His tongue was forked like a serpent's. He dragged behind him the souls of the original 13, children with burned costumes and hollowed-out eyes. He bowed before the chapel. We welcome the Blood Queen. And far beneath, the Hollow Ones stirred again. They whispered in the stone. She is the door. She is the harvest. She is the Hollow. 7 a.m., Town Hall broadcast. Someone. No one knew. Who hijacked the old radio tower? On every frequency, across every speaker in the town, a child's voice echoed. She's waiting. She's hungry. The Queen will not stop. The Queen wants your faces. At first, it was dismissed as a prank. Until the faces started disappearing. Literally. People turned to find their neighbors, friends, and spouses faceless, skin stretched blank, like dolls. Their voices were gone. Their souls swallowed. Only hollow masks of skin remained. The Queen was harvesting identity. Every person who forgot her. Every person who let the children die. Every liar, every coward. Gone. 7:13 a.m., Holden's return. From the collapsed rubble of the Hollow Chapel, something crawled out. It wasn't human anymore. It used to be Captain Holden, Mara's partner. But now his body was torn and fused with vines, jack-o'-lantern roots bursting from his ribs, his face burned with runes that glowed red-hot. He stumbled into the open, eyes black, mouth drooling hollow blood. But somewhere, deep inside, he remembered her. He whispered her name like a prayer. Mara. And the Hollow hissed back. She does not remember you. He fell to his knees, screaming. The vines around his chest tightened, snapping his spine. He became the 13th Herald. His job, lead the final ritual. The Blood Ascension. 7:30 a.m., the blood falls. At the center of Hollow's End, the fountain in Hollow Square erupted. Not with water. With blood. Thick, black-red blood that sprayed into the sky and rained over the town in warm sheets. It soaked through roofs. It filled the streets. It ran down storm drains and seeped into basements. Wherever it touched, reality decayed. Walls melted. Paintings screamed. Windows turned into staring eyes. And from every puddle, something climbed out. Not demons. Not ghosts. Reflections. Twisted, shadow versions of the townsfolk, mocking, repeating everything the real people said, but slightly wrong. Wrong voices. Wrong laughs. Wrong eyes. They whispered over and over. She remembers you. She remembers your sins. She remembers your screams. 7:44 a.m., inside the Blood Queen's mind. Mara sat inside her own head, watching through her eyes as the town crumbled beneath her throne. She couldn't move. Couldn't speak. But she felt everything. The pain. The hunger. The rage. The guilt. The Reaper had become her shadow, whispering endlessly. Let them suffer. Let them remember. Let them pay. She saw Marcus, now a child of the Hollow, standing beside her throne. He wasn't angry anymore. He was proud. You're doing it, he said, smiling. You're finishing what they started. No, she tried to scream inside. But her body just smiled back. 8 a.m., the town vanishes. From the outside world, Hollow's End simply disappeared. 1 minute, it was there, located on every map, with state borders and police lines around it. Then the next. Gone. No GPS. No files. No weather readings. No memory. Those who had family there couldn't remember their names. Photographs turned black. Documents turned blank. Satellite footage became static. Only one thing remained in its place. A massive black stain, visible only from above, like a burned scar on the earth. And at its center, something beating. A red light. Pulsing. Alive. 8:13 a.m., final transmission. Somehow, a final message crackled through a stolen police frequency, carried on broken static and hollow blood. A woman's voice. Mara Vex. If anyone hears this, don't look for me. Don't look for the town. Hollow's End doesn't want to be found. And I don't want to be saved. They chose me. And now I choose them. I remember everything. I am the Blood Queen. The message ended with 13 screams. Then silence. Then laughter. November 1st, 8:44 a.m. Location, outside Hollow's End, classified perimeter. The perimeter of Hollow's End was now a black zone. No drones returned. No satellites registered anything beyond the cloud wall that coiled like smoke around the town. It was no longer on the map. It was something else. It was becoming. Agents in hazmat suits called it the Scar. Military reports classified it as an environmental disaster. But no one spoke of the radio transmission. No one mentioned Mara Vex. But somewhere deep within the Pentagon, a frequency played on loop. I am the Blood Queen. I remember everything. The hollow is not closed. It is spreading. 9:13 a.m., the outskirts. The fog finally moved. It bled across roads. Into forests. Over fences. And then. Into people. The first victims were a search and rescue team posted along Route 47. 6 members. All accounted for. Until they weren't. One moment, sipping coffee, laughing nervously. The next, silence. Then static on the comms. Then laughter. By the time backup arrived, all 6 had carved jack-o'-lantern faces into their own cheeks, mouths split ear to ear. They stood in a circle, holding hands, chanting in dead tongues. In the middle of their circle, a child's skull, placed perfectly on a throne made of gas masks and radios. They looked up in unison and whispered. Long live the Queen. 10:06 a.m., the hollow awakens the earth. In the center of Hollow's End, the new chapel pulsed like a monstrous heart. The black stone had grown taller, spiked towers rising into the rotted sky like fangs. Blood waterfalls spilled endlessly from the structure, soaking the ground. The thrones inside now hovered, circling like moons around the Blood Queen's twisted figure. Mara no longer resembled anything human. Her body was stretched, elongated, limbs like spires, ribcage open like wings. A crown of 13 broken masks hovered above her head, spinning and twitching. The vines of the hollow coiled around her spine, and her heart beat in time with the chapel itself. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply remembered. And the world bent beneath her thoughts. Wherever her memories landed, the hollow followed. 10:33 a.m., first city infected. They called it Ashfall, Maine, a town 50 miles northeast of Hollow's End. That morning, the fog rolled in. Children stared blankly at television screens that no longer worked. Then they blinked. And when they did, their eyes bled black. By 11 a.m., the entire town was gone. Not destroyed. Erased. No structures. No bodies. No signs. Just a jagged crater of black glass and 13 jack-o'-lanterns, all carved with the same twisted face. Maras. 11:44 a.m., the blood tide. From the sewers, the hollow blood rose. It came like a tide, thick and slow, creeping into basements, pooling in alleyways, oozing up through drains in kitchens and hospitals and schools. No one knew where it came from. But wherever it reached, reality twisted. Rooms elongated. Walls pulsed. Mirrors became doorways. And people, normal, innocent people, turned on each other. Their faces shifted mid-sentence, becoming those of missing children from decades past. Then they attacked. With teeth. With scissors. With broken smiles. 12 p.m., the 13th echo. 13 cities reported identical events. 13 mothers heard their dead children whisper from beneath the floorboards. 13 rivers turned black. 13 birds fell dead in perfect rings. And in every reflection, every window, every puddle, every phone screen, she appeared. The Blood Queen. Smiling. Bleeding. Waiting. 12:33 p.m., the fall of reality. Hollow's End was no longer a town. It was a god. The Hollow had become a living entity, birthed through blood and memory, rage and silence. It moved beneath the skin of the world now, through pipelines and power lines, through memory and grief. And Mara was its heart. Inside her throne, she began to weep. Not tears. But faces. Each tear became a face she remembered. Her brother Marcus. Holden. Clara. Her mother, screaming as the parade swallowed her son. Each face hovered in front of her before melting into her skin. She remembered everything. And that remembrance was her weapon. 1 p.m., global silence. Communication dropped worldwide for 13 minutes. No calls. No internet. No broadcasts. Just silence. Then, from every speaker, screen, and whispering child's mouth, the same phrase. Do you remember her? And then came the screams. 1:13 p.m., the final harvest. Across the world, mirrors shattered. Wherever glass broke, portals opened. Not doors. Mouths. Giant, gaping maws that reached from the hollow and dragged in the living. Entire families. Entire towns. Pulled into screaming vortexes made of jack-o'-lantern teeth and vines. They didn't die. They were remembered. And once remembered, they were never real again. 1:44 p.m. The Blood Queen ascends. In the sky above what once was Hollow's End, a black eclipse formed. But it wasn't the moon. It was her face. The Queen of Hollow Blood. Stitched smile. Eyes of flame. And around her, 13 flaming thrones circled like comets. She opened her mouth. And spoke one final time, not with sound, but with thought. And the thought was not a message. It was a curse. A memory implanted in every soul across the globe. The children you let die. The cries you ignored. The screams that faded in the dark. You forgot them. Now you will be remembered. 2 p.m., the world ends in silence. One final scream echoed from the hollow. It wasn't pain. It wasn't fear. It was completion. And then, nothing. Epilogue, the last photograph. In the ruins of the Library of Congress, long after cities fell and names were eaten, a single Polaroid was found. A Halloween photo from 1995. A parade. 13 children in costume. A smiling detective holding her little brother's hand. And behind them, barely visible in the shadows, a woman in a bone crown. Eyes like red lanterns. Watching. Waiting. Someone had scrawled beneath the photo. She remembers you. The end.